It's something you've always promised yourself. Gleaming, untouched, spotless throughout, everyone dreams of owning a new car. But is it always such a good idea? Well, certainly they do have many advantages. The latest registration plate, 1, 2, or even 3 years warranty, advantageous finance terms, perhaps more than anything, the fact that it's yours and nobody's used it before. But just consider for a moment what these luxuries are costing you. This new Mondeo costs around £12,000 on the road, which is great value if you have that sort of budget to work to. But if you haven't got that much money and need to borrow perhaps half of it at an interest rate of maybe 10% APR, it's going to cost you £600 a year in interest alone. Then there's another 5% that you're losing in interest at the bank on your half of the car, and that's another £300 a year. So together, that represents about £1,800 in interest over the first 2 years. Now, assuming that you do perhaps 30,000 miles over those first 2 years, you'd be unlikely to get more than £7,000 for the car when you sell it. So that means it would have cost you nearly £6,800 in interest and depreciation in just 2 years. And you can get an awful lot of car for £6,800 on the second-hand market. Of course, some dealers do offer excellent finance deals, but it's still hardly surprising that there are some people who absolutely refuse to buy new. A friend of mine who believes he knows a thing or two about cars has never owned a new car, and he reckons that a year's motoring has never cost him more than £800 in depreciation and repair costs. Now that's cost-effective motoring. And that's really what this program is all about, helping you to choose a really good second-hand car that will give you years of service for a very reasonable running cost. Now, if one of these has been your lifelong dream, the possible savings can be even higher. A 15 to 20-year-old roller can be bought for about £7,500 in very good condition. In fact, the higher the original car price, the greater the savings that can be made by buying second-hand. But don't forget that if you are tempted by the extraordinary value and prestige offered by an elderly Rolls-Royce or maybe a Jaguar, you must remember that it will be more expensive to run and certainly very much more expensive to repair should something go wrong. A good rule of thumb is to remember that if it was expensive new, it will be expensive to repair all through its life. In other words, if you can only just afford to buy it, you can't afford to run it. Now, some ill-informed people think that the term second-hand car, or one of the more politically correct phrases such as pre-owned, second user, previously experienced, denotes an old banger. But no, not so. It should mean a car in excellent condition where someone else has taken care of the initial depreciation and sorted out the early bugs that can sometimes appear in new cars. You can then profit from their original investment and come up with a really good value buy that will serve you well for some years. So, having made the decision to buy second-hand, what are the next steps that should be taken? Well, as with buying a new car, firstly we have to decide which type of car, which manufacturer, which model we want to buy, as well as what sort of budget we have to spend. Try never to buy on price alone. If you're just looking for a cheap set of wheels, remember that cheap cars are usually cheap for a good reason. Perhaps they're too old to consider as reliable everyday transport. Maybe they're just too high a mileage and in poor condition. Or maybe they're just poor cars. The reason, for instance, why some second-hand Eastern Bloc cars are so cheap is that they were cheap when new, pretty unpleasant to drive, and will be even worse by the time they reach the second-hand market. So begin your search by shortlisting maybe 2 or 3 possibilities that suit you, your family, your lifestyle, and then begin to learn a bit about them. Firstly, learn your prices. There are a number of publications on the market that offer guidance on car prices over a range of years and condition. The trade used this elusive little book, Glass's Guide, but it's only available to the trade, and it's unlikely that you'll be able to get your hands on one of these, as they're jealously guarded by garages and are presumably eaten for security purposes when the next month's issue comes out. You won't find one of those. But magazines like this, Car Choice, will tell you almost everything you need to know. It will give you a full rundown on almost every model from every manufacturer produced over the last 7 years. And it's invaluable as a ready reference for both general information and price guidelines. So begin by making a list of the cars that interest you and then list those available at the price that you want to pay. This will enable you to produce an average price and year from which you can work. Now don't forget that these are the asking prices, not the price at which they'll necessarily be sold. Magazines like Car Choice also give you an idea about model detail changes, and some even list recurring faults to watch out for. Thus, if you decide you need a car with power steering or automatic transmission or a factory-fitted sunroof, one of the magazines will have exactly the information you need to look up and then to find out which year and model those options appeared on. Now, try and find out about the general condition you might expect of the year and type of car that you're considering. Keep an eye open for similar cars parked in the street and on dealer forecourts. Look at older models of the same type. How well do they seem to hold their value? Do they all seem to show the same rust spots in the same places? Do certain colours seem to wear worse than others? Metallic paints, for example, are notoriously difficult to match and have been known to cause trouble after 4 or 5 years. The next piece of research is to price up a selection of vital and commonly needed spare parts. Try costing out exhaust systems, tyres, a replacement clutch, and maybe even a reconditioned engine, some of which you may need at some stage during your ownership. Often you'll find, for instance, that foreign cars have exhaust systems that cost up to twice as much as their English equivalent. And this again could well be an influencing factor in your choice of car. At this stage, it's also essential to obtain an insurance quote. Ring around a number of insurance companies as the costs will vary enormously. When obtaining a quote, you'll need to bear in mind who will be driving the car. Will a young son or daughter be on the policy? Is the car a GT, an injection, or a high-performance model? If so, this could mean that the insurance on the car may be hundreds of pounds a year more expensive or even impossible to insure for some young drivers. A major factor to consider when deciding on what car to buy. Ford Cosworth Sierras, for instance, are astonishingly good value second-hand. Around £6,000 will see you with as much performance and handling capability as many of today's super sports cars. But unfortunately, the downside is that they will be almost impossible to insure for anyone under 25 and vastly expensive for anyone else. That's why they're so cheap to buy. Now, many cars have a series of engine and trim options, which, while they vary relatively little on paper, can actually make a great deal of difference to the overall running costs. The ubiquitous Ford Sierra, for instance, has the option of 1600cc, 1800cc, 2-litre engines, plus the 4-wheel drive version. Some come in GL or gear trim, and the gear models offer almost every conceivable extra, which is great if you need electric-powered everything, which may not really be essential for your needs. They are, however, one of the most popular models for thieves, and thus less popular with the insurers. Insurers are a cautious bunch. They need to be, as they've taken a fair hammering in the last few years, and they will expect someone who buys the most powerful model in the range to drive it fairly quickly. So if performance isn't important to you, the smaller engine models will be quite adequate and be cheaper to insure. Petrol economy is another important factor to look at and will once again depend on the type of motoring you intend to do. And don't forget diesel. Diesel cars are generally longer lived than petrol, they're a great deal more economical to run and cheaper to insure. However, they are a certain amount slower and are generally more expensive to buy, with higher mileages when they get to the second-hand market. Here's a checklist of the points for your reference. Now, once you've decided on the type and model of car that you want to buy and the budget you have to spend, the time has come to get out and start looking. So what are your buying options? Well, broadly speaking, there are three ways of buying a second-hand car. Buying from a private seller, from a dealer, or buying from an auction. Let's look at those in detail. Buying privately is, for many people, the preferred option. Often the cars are cheaper and one can form an opinion of the seller and the way the car has probably been treated. There are any number of newspapers, magazines and periodicals that carry car advertising. Everyone has heard of Exchange and Mart, but there are plenty of others available, many carrying photographs of the cars for sale. This one, Auto Trader for instance, has an enormous selection and is published regionally to make your searches more convenient. Make sure that you get a good selection of magazines on the day they come out and then start ploughing through them. There will also be plenty of cars available in your local newspaper, and that's probably the most logical place to start. Now, it's often hard to know from a small ad if the seller is a trader or a genuine private seller. Almost all trade advertisements will carry the letter T after the ad, which denotes a trade seller, but not all do, so beware. Buying a car can be very time-consuming, so try to set a distance limit on how far you're prepared to go to look at a car. Probably 30 miles is about tops, as there is nothing more frustrating than to travel 100 miles there and back, only to find the car has just been sold or that it was totally unlike the printed description. Do be a little careful of cars being sold on the street with a handwritten notice in the window. Quite often, of course, they are being sold by genuine family owners and may well offer a real chance of a bargain. But take care. I've seen a number of such cars with similar style notices in the same handwriting, all parked in a 1 mile radius of each other. A sure sign of a little backstreet trading operation. We'll come to that in a moment. At this early stage in your search, it's vital to develop a healthy level of scepticism. Remember what your mother told you about never trusting strangers. Well, in the case of second-hand car buying from private sellers, this is definitely advice to remember. So make sure that you're always prepared to question and cross-check everything that's said to you. Dealers tend to make few mistakes in their purchases for two reasons. Firstly, they know a bit about cars, but secondly, and most importantly, they're never in a hurry to buy. They know that there are plenty more just around the next corner, and they're not afraid to say no.
Well, it's always a problem for the person wanting to buy a used car to know whether the person they're buying from is actually in trade or business, or whether they are a genuine private seller. You can have bargains when you go privately, but you need to be very aware of the problems. You don't get the same rights when you buy from a private person, for instance. Under the Sale of Goods Act, you're entitled to goods of merchantable quality that correspond to this description, that are fit for the purpose, and they wouldn't be applicable in a private sale. So it's important that you know exactly what you're doing.
Almost every car advertisement will be written to say the famous phrase, careful owner, regularly serviced, immaculate condition. But these phrases should remain in doubt until you actually see the car. There are a number of other catchphrases that have proved popular over the years. They may not always mean quite what they say. Think of these for a while. Average mileage. More mileage than I wish to print in the ad. Seat covers. Torn seats underneath. One lady owner. 25,000 miles with a choke out. Very careful owner. Has constantly slipped the clutch and worn out the transmission. And so they go on. But in order to avoid rushing hither and thither, examining grossly misdescribed cars, remember that a great deal of useful information can be gained on the phone. Here, it's a good idea to make up a number of copies of a pre-prepared list of vital questions. Something like this. Now, the first fact to check is that the vendor is a genuine private seller and not a backstreet trader who's selling a selection of cars. So try a conversation that starts something like this. I'm ringing about the car. If he says which one, he's most likely a backstreet trader and should be avoided at all costs. Similarly, if an ad gives a phone number and a Christian name, ignore the Christian name and just ask for the person selling the car. Now, there's unlikely to be more than one car for sale at any particular phone number. Often, an illicit trader will use a different Christian name for each car he's selling, so again, we're going to get one step ahead of him. Also, be wary of cars being sold from mobile phones, and also those ones that give a set time to ring, because the seller may well be working from a public phone box. Now, ask how long he's owned the car, and be suspicious of anything under, say, 12 months. Watch out for unlikely stories being set up to cover the fact that the seller's name and address may not be that one that's found on the registration document. Beware of gems such as these. Well, the car isn't actually mine. I'm selling it for my brother-in-law. Well, he's not exactly my brother-in-law, but he's going out with my sister. I've only had the car a few weeks and I haven't got around to putting it in my name yet. I'm only selling it because it's too powerful for the wife. I've only had it a few weeks, but I've been given a company car and I don't need it now. I'm selling it for my friend, but he's gone abroad. All tales of this nature should be treated with the utmost suspicion, as they probably signify a little clandestine operation running from home. Leave it and look elsewhere. A genuine seller should be quite obvious after a short conversation, and should the phrase, "Listen, I want to be quite honest with you," be said at any time, proceed with even greater caution. Now, ask the rest of the questions on your list. What is the registration letter and year? This is important as the car registration changes in August and thus spans 2 calendar years, not 1. Ask the colour, the mileage, if a service history exists, how many owners the car has had, also how long the MOT has to run. Try to make sure that there's at least 6 months left to go, as you don't want to end up with a potential MOT failure. All cars over 3 years old have to be tested, so if the car's coming up for a test in a short time, ask the seller if he's prepared to offer it with a new MOT certificate before you buy it. Ask why they're selling it, what faults there are on the car, and be specific. Ask about rust spots, scratches, maybe even dents. Ask about the condition of the upholstery. In short, anything that will enable you to build up a picture of the car and a feeling for the honesty of the seller. There are undoubtedly great bargains to be found at an auction, and provided you go to a reputable auction house, you'll have the opportunity of bidding against the trade and coming away with a well-priced car.
The advice that we give private buyers coming to an auction for the first time is to watch, listen, look, ask questions, and don't buy a motor vehicle unless you're absolutely confident that you know what you are doing. I asked a professional buyer once, how do you buy a car at auction? And he gave me the following advice. He suggested, first of all, that you take the catalogue for the sale and you go out with plenty of time and view the vehicles. You have some idea of the type of vehicle that you are looking for, but you're not fixed because otherwise you limit yourself. You study those vehicles while they're awaiting sale. He then suggested that while the vehicle is in the lineup, waiting to go through the auction where the vehicle is available for even further inspection, you have a good look inside it, you can lift the bonnet if you wish, you have a look to see whether there's any smoke pouring out of the exhaust, all the simple telltale signs. Then when the vehicle is driven into the auction, you follow the vehicle through. You follow it into the auction, you then satisfy yourself that this is the vehicle you want. The most important thing then is to have fixed a price in your mind as to how much you want to pay for that vehicle. Now, even the most experienced buyers get bidding fever. Now, if you're a professional buyer, obviously you've got the finances to support such a mistake. If you're a member of the public, you don't necessarily have those finances. So we advise people to set themselves a limit and know when to stop. We would also advise buyers that if they have £3,500 to spend, that they look to spend around £3,000 to leave themselves a few £100s to put right what maybe is wrong. We do in fact produce a booklet called Buying at Auction. It's a free guide which is available at the counter to people to the uninitiated.
80% of cars are auctioned as seen. Now that means that what you buy is what you get, and there's no comeback for any faults you discover after you collect the car. The other 20% are with warranty. That means that you get 1 hour to test the car after buying it, and if you find any undeclared faults, you can return the car and get your money back. However, the auction scene is changing, and Central have now introduced an extended 3-month warranty at some of their sales.
The extended warranty system will offer an extended warranty to buyers of vehicles at auction for 3 months, with an option in some cases to extend that warranty further. It will be a full mechanical warranty, including such items as alternator, gearbox, engine and the major components.
Which sales the last time done? 3737.
I would say that if someone's going to go to an auction house, then it needs to be a reputable firm. You need to look at the terms and conditions of trading, for instance. Do you have any comeback at all? Can you return the vehicle if you don't like it within an hour or some specified period? How long have they been there? Again, are they members of any sort of auction association? All those are useful pointers. The sort of auction that ends up on a bomb site somewhere, I wouldn't touch with a barge pole.
If you are a little nervous about bidding, it may well be worth visiting the auction a couple of times before actually waving your hand, so as to develop a feel for how it all works. And a couple of words of caution. Always try to go to a large and well-known auction group who have a reputation to keep up, and never buy cars being offered for sale outside an auction site. There's a very good chance that any such car is either stolen or in a very dodgy state. You have been warned.
There are, of course, advantages from buying from the used car dealer, which we cannot and will not be able to compete with. We cannot offer a one-to-one service. We cannot offer you time to make a decision over your purchase. As you know, the auction is a very quick process. We cannot offer part exchange facilities, finance facilities, or after-sales service. Our experience has shown that the majority of private buyers are in the up to £3,500 price bracket. They are generally the type of people who were probably buying out of the local papers. And as I'm sure you're aware, there are disadvantages to buying from the local papers if the vehicle happens to be stolen. Whereas at an auction, you will pay a premium, a small fee, which is known as a service charge, to a maximum of £50 per item, which includes an indemnity against that vehicle being stolen or on hire purchase. And should you suffer any loss, and if there is a defect in title on the goods that we supply, you are guaranteed a full refund of your money.
Buying from a dealer will mean spending a little more money for any given year and model, as the dealer obviously has to make a profit to stay in business. On the other hand, he should be able to offer you a wide choice of similar cars in one location, along with finance terms and mechanical guarantees. Oh, there is also the added security of his liability under the Sale of Goods Act. And this should mean that you'll have certain safeguards generally unobtainable when buying privately or at some auctions.
Undoubtedly, you'll pay less buying from a private seller. However, once you purchase the car is yours. If something goes wrong, you have no recourse, nobody to go back against. However, coming to a main dealer like us, you have a complete facility full of systems to back up the purchase. Again, from the financing all the way through service, through warranty work, etc., under the watchful eye of the manufacturer that we represent as a franchisee. In addition to that, you have a car that's been well maintained, number one. You have a car that we guarantee to you, number two, through our systems. Number three, once you drive off the forecourt, you have complete confidence and have a comfortable feeling that this car is a good car because I got it from a main dealer. And that's important when you spend your money.
Do make sure you choose a reputable looking operation, preferably one that you've seen to be in business for a number of years. Avoid at all costs the Arthur Daly type of setup, doing business from a porter cabin on a rough piece of ground. That could be a real here today, gone tomorrow operation.
It's always very difficult to make a recommendation as to the sort of garage that somebody should go to. In our business in trading standards, I'm afraid we've prosecuted some of the biggest as well as some of the smallest. There are advantages in going to the larger garages which are perhaps members of a trade association. Again, that's worth looking at. It may be that the trade association offers some sort of arbitration scheme, so there may be some benefit to the consumer from that point of view. I think it's useful to go to garages which have been there for a number of years, for instance. Are they a reputable dealer? What's known about them? Look for those sort of messages about the establishment.
Now, let's move on to choosing the actual car that we're going to buy. For the purposes of this program, we've stuck with reliable and popular cars to demonstrate how to go about actually making your final purchase. Lined up here, we have 4 Ford Escorts in various body and engine options, all somewhat different in their condition. Each one comes with such documentation as is available. It's vital when buying any car that you check its documentation carefully to try and verify the mileage, the service history, and to check for inconsistencies. Remember that service history doesn't just mean a couple of bills for an exhaust replacement, a water pump and a tyre. It should mean a proper dossier and all the repairs done to the car with relevant service entries in the car's service history book. Or, if the car's been serviced outside the dealership network, a selection of receipts for the work done. I once heard of a car that had a small exercise book that went with it. In it, the owner had listed every repair, nut, bolt, oil change and gallon of petrol that he'd ever put in the car. But that's a real rarity. Take a close look at the V5 registration document. Does it contain the name and the correct address of the person selling the car? If not, why not? The V5 will also give you a chassis number to check against the chassis plate on the car, along with a colour and year of manufacture. Now double check too that the car is the same model as mentioned on the V5. If the car says GL and the V5 says GTI, you could well have come up with a problem. On a fairly recent car, the V5 will tell you how many owners the car has had and the name and address of the current and previous owner. Now try and note them down, because it's amazing what can come to light with a quick phone call, and the previous owner probably won't mind a bit as they no longer have a financial interest in the car. If they're available, check the old MOT certificates carefully. All cars over 3 years old need to be tested. See if the increases in mileage are consistent from one year to the next. And if only the current certificate is available, keep a mental note of that fact as you progress further in your inspection. They may well have been trying to hide the real mileage. But remember that the MOT certificate is no indication that the car is still roadworthy. It will only tell you that the car was roadworthy when last inspected. Use the certificate to cross-check the following items: the current mileage of the car, the year of manufacture, and the frame number. There are a lot of stolen certificates around, so make sure that the press stamp of the garage is clearly embossed at the base of the form.
The test says that the vehicle is roadworthy at the time of the test, and you really can't place much more reliance on that, especially as occasionally we come across instances with MOTs which have been stolen perhaps, or they've been manipulated in some way, they've a forgery even. And so you can't place too much reliance on an MOT certificate.
So that's the documentation checked. Now we've got to go and take a closer look at the car itself. Apart from putting your brain firmly into gear, keeping an open mind and a determination not to jump in with both feet, make sure you take the following items when inspecting any second-hand car: a notepad and pen, a screwdriver to prod with, a small weak magnet, a torch, a mirror, a piece of cloth to kneel on, and if you have a friend who really knows about cars, take them along too. First of all, take a walk around the car to see that it's sitting well on the road. Make sure the suspension hasn't sagged on one side, or that the car looks rather low at the rear. Take particular note of this if the car's in a state or has been fitted with a tow bar. A couple of years spent carrying heavy goods around could well have worn out the rear suspension and put undue strain on the engine itself. Now move on to the bodywork. Bodywork is probably the most important single point to look at when choosing a car. Many mechanical problems can be put right reasonably easily, but replacing sills and body panels is an expensive business, and if rust has taken hold, it's a downward path whatever you do. What we're looking for here is good straight panels that have not been accident damaged. Start by looking along the side of the car at an oblique angle. Ripples in the panels and differing quality paintwork are a sure sign of repairs. Look carefully for overspray on the window rubbers and around the edge of body panels. Other favourite places for spotting overspray are inside the wheel arches and underneath the bonnet. Look too in the engine bay to see if it's covered in any dust from rubbing down body filler in the workshops, which is another sure sign that bodywork repair has been done. Check to see if body panels seem dull, as this is often a sign of old repair work that's not been done as well as it should have been. Having looked at similar and older models of the car of your choice during your research, you should know where the likely rust spots will be. On Ford Sierras, for instance, a favourite rust trap is the leading edge of the rear wings. Early signs of tiny rust spots and bubbles there can lead to future troubles. Scratches and edge chips on panels are easy to touch up, but bubbles in the main body of a panel are more serious. Satisfy yourself as well as to the fit of the body panels, to see that the panel gaps are the same both left and right of the car. Check for the smooth opening and shutting of the doors. Check underneath the bottom of the doors. If the drainage holes are blocked, the trapped water will slosh around inside the door, causing rust damage very quickly. You can actually shake the door and listen to see if any water is trapped in them. Check also inside the boot and under the carpets for signs of rust. Now, if you do find any spots or patches of rust, give them a closer inspection. If you can get permission from the owner, then take your screwdriver out and just prod those patches to see if the screwdriver goes through. Now, even if the screwdriver doesn't go through, this particular example really was a lot of rust and it's something I'd steer clear of. But even if no rust shows, there could still be problems with filler. So here, take your magnet out and just run over suspect areas, and if at any place the magnet doesn't stick properly, then there could well be filler underneath there, and again, you've got problems. While you're doing general outside checks, look for unevenly worn tyres, which along with rippled body panels are another possible pointer to previous accident damage. If you think that there might be a problem, check the major chassis sections to see if they're straight or slightly rippled. Rippling there could indicate that the car's been pulled straight after a fairly heavy smash. Now check the wheel bearings. To check for wear, pull the wheel hard backwards and forwards at the top. There shouldn't be any movement at all if the bearings are right. Now check the shock absorbers by pressing down on the body and releasing. The car should return firmly to its proper ride height without bouncing. If it bounces up and down like a pogo stick, the shock absorbers are worn and will need replacing. Look underneath the car at the engine, gearbox and axle area. See if there are any signs of any fresh leaks. A build-up of old oil stains are not necessarily a problem, but obvious regular drips could well be. While you're down underneath the car, have a look at the exhaust system from front to back. If it's rusty and going at the joints, it could cost you £80, maybe a lot more to replace the whole system. So make sure that that's reflected in any offer you make for the car. Try and see if the fuel tank has any little wet patches, which are a sure sign of leaks. And while you're poking around underneath, look out for any new underseal that's been applied. Ladling on fresh, thick underseal is a wonderful way of covering up rust problems or any new welding in the chassis of underbody areas. Look inside the boot and check the floor panels are straight. Again, ripples in the floor panel could mean repairs after a rear end smash. And while you're there, check the condition of the spare tyre and turn it over and check the other side. Now, while we're on the subject of tyres, look for the following. Good tread. You want to see at least 4 millimetres. Check for cuts or bulges. New tyres can cost between £40 up to about £100 each, depending on the tyre type and the model of the car. So again, this could be a good bargaining point. But always be a little bit suspicious of cars with newly painted shiny tyres. This is often a giveaway that the car has been buffed up just for a sale. Having satisfied yourself as to the external condition, it's now time to look at the mechanical side, and a visual check under the bonnet will tell you a lot. First, see if it's generally clean and has a looked after appearance. A nice even spread of dirt isn't actually a bad sign. In fact, a spotlessly clean engine bay can be hiding some nasty faults. See if there are any new components fitted. Any new gaskets have been fitted recently. If the whole engine is new, ask the dealer for details. A new engine may mean that the car has done a very high mileage, and if the pre-engine change mileage was high, you must remember that the rest of the car's running gear will also be somewhat worn and tired. Check the cooling system. Are there any leaks or evidence of previous leaks or boiling over? These will show up as bluish or orange stains on the radiator and the radiator core. Take a good look at the battery. A good sign of a car that's been regularly serviced are clean, greased battery terminals. Are there any oil leaks from the rocker, or is there any rust marks around the top of the suspension struts? Now, while you're delving under the bonnet, check the oil to see that it's reasonably clean and that it's at the right level. Smoky engines can be made to appear much better if the oil level is lowered drastically. Make sure also that you look on the dipstick for any tiny water bubbles in the oil, because water in the oil means that the head gasket might well have gone, and that will be immediate expensive repairs. Make sure also that the oil filter is reasonably new. A rusty old filter is a sure giveaway to an engine that's been neglected. Now, all these points can tend to give a clue as to whether the car has been cared for during its life. Now, start the engine. And listen for any general knocks and rattles. A heavy knocking or rumbling which speeds up as the engine speeds up will probably mean bearing trouble, which is expensive to fix. Now though, leave the engine ticking over for a minute or two, then rev it quickly. If, when you rev it, you see grey oil smoke coming from the exhaust, it's highly likely that the piston rings and the valve guides might well be worn. Now, such wear could indicate the need for major work. Unless the car is in excellent condition otherwise and fairly cheap, again, leave it alone. But don't confuse smoke with steam or condensation, which will be very evident on cold days. A good trick is to hold your hand about 6 inches from the end of the exhaust pipe for a few moments. Now, you shouldn't see any black oily deposits on your hand when the engine's revved. Next, take off the oil filler cap and look inside. If there are white, milky deposits inside, immediately suspect that the water has been getting into the oil. Check also if oil smoke is rising from the filler hole. Again, that can be a sign of a worn engine. Now, many cars today have power steering, so now's the time to waggle the steering wheel and to check that the wheels respond instantly. Steering wheel movement that doesn't show up straight away at the front wheels indicates a worn steering mechanism or worn track rod ends. Whilst the car is running, check the clutch. Now, we've got an automatic here, so I can't demonstrate it, but when you're in a manual car, put the handbrake firmly on, check then that there's nothing in front of you, engage second gear, and using around 2,000 RPM, try and move off against the pull of the handbrake. Now, the car should stall. If it doesn't, the clutch is slipping and it'll need replacing in the very near future. Now, put the car back in neutral, again with the engine still running, and press the clutch down. If with the clutch depressed you can hear any rushing or hissing noise, then the thrust bearing is suspect. Now, a thrust bearing which operates the clutch only costs a few pounds, but it will entail pulling out the gearbox to replace it, and that's going to cost almost as much as replacing the clutch. Now, while you're inside, check the function of all the accessories, the radio, the wipers, the washers and so forth. Non-working wipers can be easy to overlook on a nice sunny day like this, but they can cost you £50 or more to repair if the motor's gone. Take a close look at the windscreen as well. See if there's any cracks or any chips, because chipped and cracked windscreens can nowadays lead to MOT failure under the new regulations, and screens are expensive things to replace. While you're in the car, check too the condition of the seats, the headlining, and the wear on the carpets. Look very closely at the pedals. If the car is supposed to have a low mileage, but the pedal rubbers seem very worn, be suspicious. It's all too easy for the unscrupulous seller to turn back the mileometer on the clock and instantly add 1,000 or two to the sales potential of the car. Check also the operation of the windows. Electric windows in particular, like these, can be very expensive to replace. So if one of them fails to work, make sure this too is reflected in your offer. If you're satisfied with the car at this stage, it's now time for a road test. But remember, you must drive the car as well as the owner. It's easy for him to cover certain faults if he knows the car well. So make sure you get some time behind the wheel. But don't forget to make sure that you're covered by either your or the seller's insurance. You don't want to end up in court. Whilst the owner is driving, take note of how the car runs and drives. Are there any crashing noises from the suspension, or clunks from the gearbox, the prop shaft or the back axle? If the car's an automatic, does it change gear smoothly and positively? Jerky or slipping changes are a sure sign of trouble. See how the owner handles the car. If he screams around to show you how great his car is, the chances are he drives like that all the time. Check too that the speedo and the mileometer work. Always be suspicious of phrases like, "It was working a few days ago." Chances are that the speedometer problems have been there for a long time, or that the speedo has been broken by someone turning back the mileage. The next step is to drive the car yourself. One of the first things to check is that the brakes are working properly and they pull the car up nice and square in a straight line. If when you gently press the brakes you get any steering wheel vibration, it's probably warped discs. So as that's something that'll cost you about £150 to replace, you better be careful of that. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that the rest of the car is a problem, as brakes do tend to wear out. Now, check to see if the car actually drives in a straight line. You really need to find a nice section of deserted road and then lift your hands off the steering wheel and just see if the car keeps in a nice straight line. Make sure it doesn't pull one way or the other. It will often make small movements if there's a camber on the road. Now the next thing to check really is the gearbox. And you need to check all the gears to see if each gear, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 are any good. If you accelerate and then decelerate, accelerate and decelerate in each gear, and just make sure it doesn't jump out of any of the gears. Because if it does fall out of one of the gears, it means the gear teeth are probably damaged or the gear selectors are bent, and gearboxes are expensive to replace. Check to the synchromesh. And this really is when you're changing down. As you go down a gear, there shouldn't be any graunchy noise. And again, when you let it into that lower gear, it shouldn't jump out. Gearboxes, of course, as I said, are expensive to replace, and on a ride like this, they could set you back about £300. Next thing is to listen for any whines. Often you can get that in cars, especially with rear-wheel drive cars from the rear end. And if you find the pitch of the whine goes up and down according to the speed of the car, from 30 miles an hour to say 50 miles an hour, it means that the back axle could well be on the way out, and again, that's more expense to repair. The next thing to feel for is any grumbling or graunchy noises from the front of the car, especially as you gently turn left or gently turn right. This can probably very well signify that the wheel bearings are worn out. Now, these aren't actually expensive things to repair or replace, but again, it's another little thing to think of before you put in your offer for the car. If the car you're testing is front-wheel drive, find a suitable space like an empty car park where you can drive the car round in a tight circle, first on full left lock, then on full right lock. Now, if this gives rise to clattering noises, then the drive shaft joints are on their way out and they're expensive to replace. When you've stopped, check the oil pressure. This should be done when the engine is hot. If there's a pressure gauge fitted, you should have already taken note of the pressure when you're driving around. But if there's only an oil warning light, first turn on the ignition to make sure that the light is still working, and now start the car up. Now, the light should go out immediately. If it doesn't go out or flickers on and off, the pressure is low and the engine could be considered suspect. If the engine tick over is set rather high, sort of rather like that, this could be an attempt to conceal low oil pressure. And if the pressure warning light doesn't work at all, it may well have been disconnected for a purpose. Now, finally, always remember that if you have an uneasy feeling about the car, don't buy it. There are plenty of others on the market, so don't be talked into buying against your better judgment, or don't even talk yourself into buying it. Now, we all have a desire to be polite, and surveys have shown that people are loath to question the integrity of a seller in a face-to-face situation. Remember that if you feel the car is not genuine or has any problems at all, just walk away. Never be panicked into feeling that you may be missing a bargain. Never be afraid to say no, or tell the seller that you wish to think about it and maybe come back another day. And most of all, don't just buy it because it's cheaper than the other ones you've seen. Don't forget that if you're still unsure about the car's mechanical condition, you can have it inspected by an engineer. One company offering such a service is Auto Report. Now, they'll give the car a thorough check-over, costing £98 on a car of this size. And the report comprises a full mechanical, electrical and structural inspection covering some 140 separate points. It also includes a status check, plus a 3-month parts warranty on most major components. Now, that's well worthwhile if you're still a little unsure about the car you're buying. If the seller's not willing to allow you to have an expert report done, there's probably something wrong, so leave the car alone. Anyway, let's move on to a final look over the car we've been testing prior to making an offer. So, we like the look of the car, we've got down a few details here, and now it's time to run some further checks on the vehicle. Because however careful you are, it's difficult to spot a car that's been stolen, It might still be the subject of a finance agreement, or perhaps the registration plate's been changed to hide its past. Now, it's not always easy to tell all this just by looking at the car, and it's not easy to tell if it's been rebuilt perhaps from a damaged write-off. So once that you've decided that you like the look of a car, and it seems the right one for you, it's well worth 5 minutes and £15 making a phone call to a company called HPI Auto Data. If we give them this registration number, they'll be able to come up and give me answers and confirm whether it's the true identity, whether it's the right make even, whether it's even the right model or colour. They'll tell you if the car is listed as either nicked, knackered or on the never never. You'll get all this information sent to you within 24 hours of a phone call. It's £15 well spent, and it could save you the heartache of buying a rebuilt wreck or a car to which you have no genuine title. We'll check it out. Let's see how it works. Hello?
HBI, good morning. Jackie speaking. Can I help you?
Yes, please. I'm thinking of buying a car, and I just wanted to check out its past history to see if it's a good one or not.
Okay. Can I have your address, please?
17 West Hill, London, SW18 5NJ.
That's 17 West Hill, London, SW18 5NJ.
Yes, that's right.
Can I have the car registration number, please?
Registered was J908CUW.
Do you know the current mileage?
Well, it's got on the clock, it's got 37,456.
And the make and the model of the vehicle, please?
It's a Sierra 1.6L blue. Well, bluish. Looks blue to me.
Thank you very much. I'll just check that registration number with you again to make sure I'm checking the correct vehicle. That's J for Juliet, 908, C for Charlie, U for Uniform, W for Whiskey.
That's it?
Right, it's coming up on the screen now. And I've done the search on registration number Juliet 908, Charlie Uniform Whiskey. The vehicle is currently recorded on our finance register under an agreement which was taken out in October 1991. Okay, and I see that there is another interest on this vehicle on the screen. Juliet 908 Charlie Uniform Whiskey is currently recorded on our condition alert register, which shows that the vehicle has been involved in a major damage-related insurance claim that was made in January of this year.
Okay, so that sounds really like a car I should stay well clear of.
Yes, you should proceed with caution on this vehicle.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that information. I'll go and look for another car somewhere else and probably give you a call back in a day or two when I've found another one. Thank you very much indeed.
Bye.
Well, that really was very useful information that's saved me putting in an offer for that car and probably saved me a lot of money as well. But if everything does measure up, it's time to put in an offer. Don't be afraid to negotiate. Of course, don't make a ridiculous offer. The seller has given you his asking price, but he does know, as well as you, that there are plenty of cars available for sale, so he will expect you to haggle over the price. Once you've reached an agreement, leave him a small deposit, say £100, and get him to sign a receipt for it. Here's a suggested format. When you return to conclude the purchase, remember that trust is a two-way deal and the seller will want you to pay in full for the car before you take it away. So you can either pay him in cash, or if you feel uncomfortable about carrying a few £1,000s on you, then offer him a banker's draft. This is a cheque made out to a named individual by the bank itself. It cannot bounce and cannot be cashed by anyone else, so it should be perfectly acceptable to the seller. Oh, and don't forget to insure the car before you drive it away. Once again, don't leave without a signed receipt, this time for the total purchase. Here's a suggested form of wording. Well, I'm pretty pleased with the deal. I've ended up with a car that's around £800 cheaper than the equivalent model from a dealer. And I negotiated a further £100 off for a non-working electric window. So overall, I think I've done pretty well. Taken care of, a car like this should give 4 or 5 years of reliable motoring, especially if I make sure that it's well maintained. And servicing is something that I should be tackling in another title in this series, The Practical Guide to Car Servicing. Now, included in this cassette about buying second-hand cars is a key card for you to refer to when looking over a car. Do use it. It will remind you of the vital points we've made, and it also includes the numbers of useful organisations mentioned in this programme. Good luck in your search for a good second-hand car. Remember the points that we've covered and never be afraid to say no. At least that way you should avoid ending up with a lemon.